the arrest that ended everything. Before we begin, remember this case was real enough to destroy lives, rewrite laws, and haunt an entire state for decades. If stories like this keep you on the edge of your seat, subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments what you think really happened, because by the end of this story, nothing will feel certain anymore. The rain fell hard over Interstate 85 just outside Raleigh, North Carolina, turning police lights into blurred streaks of red and blue across the asphalt. Patrol units boxed in a dark sedan speeding through traffic at nearly 90 miles per hour. Dispatch radios crackled with urgency. Suspect refusing to stop. Possible homicide connection. Inside the vehicle, 26-year-old Daniel Mercer gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. Witnesses later said he looked less like a criminal fleeing justice and more like a man running from something unseen. Minutes earlier, officers had discovered the body of real estate investor Margaret Halpern inside her lakeside home. The scene was disturbing, not chaotic, but strangely controlled. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just silence and a single overturned chair beside her. Daniel Mercer's fingerprints were everywhere. He had worked as a maintenance contractor for Halpern's properties. Reliable. Quiet. No criminal record. The kind of man neighbors described as invisible. Yet now, helicopters tracked him from above, while officers prepared spike strips ahead. The chase ended violently when Mercer's car spun across wet pavement and slammed into a guardrail. Officers rushed forward, weapons drawn. Mercer didn't resist. He stepped out slowly, soaked by rain, repeating the same sentence over and over. "I didn't do this, you've got the wrong man." Within 12 hours, his face dominated national news headlines. Local contractor arrested in brutal lakeside murder. Detective Laura Bennett arrived at the crime scene just before dawn. A 15-year homicide veteran, Bennett trusted evidence more than emotion. And the evidence seemed overwhelming. Mercer's fingerprints on the kitchen counter. His work boots leaving partial impressions near the hallway. Security footage placing his truck near the property that evening. Case closed, at least, that's what everyone believed. But something bothered her. Margaret Halpern was known for strict security habits. Cameras covered every entrance. Alarm systems were always armed. Yet on the night she died, the alarm had been manually disabled using the homeowner's private code. Only 3 people knew it. Margaret herself, her assistant, and someone investigators hadn't considered yet. Still, prosecutors moved fast. Public pressure demanded justice. Within 8 months, Daniel Mercer stood trial. The courtroom atmosphere felt predetermined. Jurors saw photographs, timelines, expert testimony. Mercer maintained his innocence, refusing plea deals that could spare him execution. When the verdict came, guilty of capital murder, his mother collapsed in the gallery. 2 years later, Daniel Mercer entered death row at Central Prison. And there he stayed. Days turned into years. Appeals failed. Witness memories hardened into certainty. The world forgot his name. 23 years passed. Then, on a quiet October morning, Detective Bennett, now retired, received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end trembled. "I worked security maintenance at Halpern's house back in '98, the man said. "I never came forward because I was scared." Bennett felt her pulse rise. "What are you trying to tell me?" There was a long pause. Then the words that froze her completely. The security footage from the night of the murder, someone erased 12 minutes. Silence filled the line. Because according to court records, that footage was never supposed to exist at all. The evidence that shouldn't exist. Detective Laura Bennett hadn't touched the Halpern case file in nearly a decade. Yet within minutes of ending the call, she was sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by faded folders, yellowed photographs, and trial transcripts that once defined her career. For 23 years, Daniel Mercer had lived inside a concrete cell waiting for execution. Every appeal had failed because the case appeared airtight. Physical evidence. Timeline confirmation. Motive speculation. Nothing suggested reasonable doubt. Until now. The caller identified himself as Thomas Grady, a former subcontractor hired to service Margaret Halpern's home surveillance system months before her death. Back then, Investigators documented the system as partially outdated, capable of recording but unreliable in storage. That detail helped prosecutors explain why no usable footage existed from the night of the murder. But Grady claimed something entirely different. There were backups, he told Bennett when they met in person the next day. His hands shook as he slid an old storage drive across the cafe table. Automatic off-site recording. Standard feature. Someone accessed it remotely. Bennett stared at the device. If true, it meant evidence had not failed. It had been removed. Within 48 hours, Bennett contacted investigative journalist Mark Ellison, known for reopening questionable convictions. Ellison understood immediately what was at stake. Death row cases rarely reversed after 2 decades unless something catastrophic had gone wrong. And erased footage qualified. A private forensic analyst managed to extract fragments from the aging drive. Most files were corrupted beyond recognition, but one timestamp survived. 9:12 p.m., front entrance camera. The grainy image flickered to life. Margaret Halpern's front door opened. But the man entering wasn't Daniel Mercer. The figure wore a long coat and baseball cap, pulled low, face partially hidden. He moved confidently, punching a security code without hesitation. Someone who belonged there. Bennett felt a cold realization settle in. Mercer's alleged arrival time was 9:26 p.m., 14 minutes later, which meant the prosecution's timeline collapsed instantly. Ellison pushed deeper, reviewing financial records previously ignored during trial preparation. What he uncovered shifted the case from tragic mistake to something far darker. 3 weeks before her death, Margaret Halpern had transferred nearly $2 million into a private investment account shared with her business assistant, Caroline Reeves. Reeves had testified during trial as a grieving employee, helping prosecutors describe Mercer as unstable and angry over unpaid repair invoices. Her testimony had been critical. And now, Reeves was missing. When reporters attempted contact, they discovered her home recently sold, bank accounts closed, and employment history wiped clean from corporate listings. It was as if she had quietly disappeared. Meanwhile, news of the recovered footage reached Mercer's defense attorney, triggering an emergency legal motion. Execution proceedings were halted pending review. For the first time in 23 years, Daniel Mercer was removed from isolation and told his case was being reconsidered. Prison staff later said he didn't celebrate. He simply sat down and cried. But as investigators reopened the file, another unsettling discovery surfaced. The original lead prosecutor on Mercer's case, Assistant District Attorney Richard Hale, had resigned abruptly 6 months after the conviction. Officially, it was for health reasons. Unofficially, internal memos revealed disciplinary concerns tied to evidence disclosure violations, records never shown to Mercer's defense. Bennett felt the investigation slipping into dangerous territory. Because wrongful convictions were one thing, a systematic concealment was another. Late that night, Ellison called her, his voice tight with urgency. "You need to see this," he said. He had obtained archived phone records connected to Margaret Halpern's final day alive. One number appeared repeatedly in her call history. 7 calls within 2 hours before her death. The registered owner stopped Bennett's breath cold. The number belonged to Richard Hale, the prosecutor who helped send Daniel Mercer to death row. And at 9:10 p.m., just minutes before the unidentified man entered the house, Hale's phone pinged a cell tower less than half a mile from Halpern's home. The case wasn't falling apart anymore. It was turning into something unimaginable. Because if the prosecutor had been there that night, then Daniel Mercer may have spent 23 years awaiting execution, while the real killer helped convict him. The call that changed everything. By sunrise, the Halpern case had transformed from a closed conviction into a national crisis. News outlets across the United States began asking the same terrifying question: how does a man spend 23 years on death row while the truth sits hidden in plain sight? Detective Laura Bennett barely slept as federal investigators joined the reopened inquiry. The recovered footage, financial transfers, and phone records painted a picture no one inside the justice system wanted to confront. Assistant District Attorney Richard Hale was no longer just connected to the case. He was at the center of it. But Hale was nowhere to be found. Authorities arrived at his suburban home outside Charlotte only to discover it empty. Furniture gone. Files missing. Neighbors reported seeing moving trucks days earlier. He had vanished just as Daniel Mercer's execution was halted. The timing felt deliberate. Meanwhile, investigative journalist Mark Ellison uncovered the final piece hidden beneath decades of overlooked paperwork. Margaret Halpern had been preparing to testify in a federal fraud investigation involving real estate laundering schemes worth millions. One of the legal advisors connected to those deals? Richard Hale. Halpern wasn't just a victim of violence. She had become a liability. And Daniel Mercer, a quiet contractor with routine access to her home, had unknowingly become the perfect scapegoat. Under mounting pressure, a nationwide warrant was issued. Airports flagged Hale's passport. Financial tracking units monitored international transfers. 3 days later, authorities traced a withdrawal from a coastal town in Maine. When U.S. Marshals entered a small marina motel, they found Hale sitting alone, television glowing softly in the corner. He didn't resist arrest. According to reports, his first words were chillingly calm. "I wonder how long it would take." During interrogation, Hale denied committing murder, but admitted something equally devastating. He confessed to suppressing evidence during Mercer's trial, claiming he believed Mercer was probably guilty anyway, and that revealing uncertainties would destroy his career and expose larger financial crimes. But investigators already had more than enough. Forensic reanalysis confirmed Hale's presence inside Halpern's home that night. Financial motives tied directly to the missing investment funds. Surveillance deletion traced back to credentials authorized through his legal access. The truth finally surfaced after 23 years. Daniel Mercer had never been the killer. Weeks later, Mercer walked out of prison a free man. Cameras captured the moment sunlight hit his face, something he hadn't experienced without bars since 1999. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones crowded forward, but Mercer said only one sentence. "They took my life, and I can't get it back." The state issued a formal apology and later awarded one of the largest wrongful conviction settlements in U.S. history. Richard Hale was convicted of multiple federal crimes, including obstruction of justice and conspiracy connected to Halpern's death. The case seemed finished. Justice restored. Closure achieved. But 3 months after Mercer's release, Detective Bennett received another phone call. This time, it came from a federal investigator reviewing Hale's confiscated belongings. Inside a locked storage unit registered under Hale's name, agents discovered boxes of sealed legal files, cases he had prosecuted over 2 decades. Several convictions relied on evidence handled solely by him. And among those files were handwritten notes beside multiple defendants' names. One phrase repeated again and again. Necessary outcome. Bennett realized the nightmare might be larger than anyone imagined. Daniel Mercer hadn't just survived a wrongful conviction. He may have been only one of many. The system believed the monster had finally been caught. But as new appeals began flooding the courts, one terrifying possibility lingered. How many innocent people were still sitting in prison because the wrong man once controlled the truth? If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next case waiting in the shadows. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.